The warning came on a Tuesday morning when most of Earth was still drinking coffee. Captain Jake Morrison was checking fuel levels on his ship when the emergency broadcast cut through every communication channel in human space. The voice that spoke was not human. It was cold, mechanical, and filled with the kind of authority that comes from ruling half the galaxy. Humans of the Sol system and beyond, the alien voice began. I am Admiral Vextalk of the Zaltharian Empire. Your species has spread too far and too fast across our territory. This ends now. Jake stopped what he was doing and stared at the communication screen. Around him, his crew had gathered to listen. The bridge went silent except for the aliens. Continuing words. You have 30 of your days to abandon every world beyond your home system. Return to Earth. Submit to our rule. Pay us 60% of everything you produce. Accept our soldiers on your worlds. Do this, and you may live. As our servants. Jake felt his hands tighten into fists. He had been born on New Denver, a small colony world on the edge of human space. His parents had worked their whole lives to build a farm there. His sister still lived there with her family. If you refuse, the alien continued, we will turn every human world into glass and ash. Your cities will burn. Your children will die. Nothing will remain but empty planets spinning around dead stars. You have 30 days to decide. The transmission ended. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Jake's communications officer, Lieutenant Chris Johnson, looked up from his console. Sir, that message just went to every human settlement in the galaxy. Every colony, every ship, every outpost. They sent it everywhere at once. Jake nodded. How many ships do they have? Unknown, sir. But long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures moving toward the outer colonies. Whatever they have, it's big. On Earth, Director Lisa Park was already in an emergency meeting with the Colonial Defense Council. The room was full of angry voices and worried faces. Everyone was talking at once, trying to figure out what to do. We can't fight them, said one council member. Look at the size of their fleet. We have maybe 300 warships. They have thousands. We can't surrender either, said another. 60% tribute, military occupation? We might as well be slaves. Lisa stood up and the room went quiet. She was a small woman, but when she spoke, people listened. Colonel Hayes, she said, looking at the military officer sitting at the far end of the table. Tell us about the protocol. Colonel Ryan Hayes was a quiet man who rarely spoke in meetings. But now he stood up and walked to the front of the room. His face was serious. The Scorched Earth Protocol has been in development for 20 years, he said. Every major human settlement has hidden fusion charges built into its core systems. If we activate them, the planets become uninhabitable for thousands of years. The room erupted in shocked voices. Most of the council members had never heard of this before. You're talking about destroying our own worlds, someone shouted. Better than letting aliens take them, Hayes replied calmly. The charges create radioactive dead zones. No one can live there. No one can mine there. No one can use those worlds for anything. Lisa looked around the room. How long do we have? Based on their fleet movements, maybe 20 days before they reach the outer colonies, Hayes said. We need to start evacuating civilians now. Meanwhile, on the farming world of Green Valley, Sam Cooper was loading supplies into his truck. He had heard the alien broadcast like everyone else. Now he was driving from farm to farm, talking to his neighbors. They're coming, he told the Martinez family as they stood in their doorway. Earth says we need to evacuate. This is our home, Mrs. Martinez said. We've been here for 15 years. Where are we supposed to go? Sam didn't have a good answer. The evacuation ships could only carry so many people. And even if everyone got off Green Valley safely, where would they live? There weren't enough ships or stations to hold millions of refugees. I'm organizing the militia, Sam said. Anyone who wants to stay and fight can join us. We can't stop their big ships, but we can make them pay for every inch of ground. Back in space, Jake was getting reports from colony worlds across human territory. Everywhere, people were making the same hard choice. Some packed their belongings and hoped for rescue ships. Others grabbed weapons and prepared to fight. On the mining station Asteroid Base 7, Supervisor Kevin Walsh was overseeing the loading of the most valuable equipment onto transport ships. The miners worked around the clock, knowing they might never see their home again. How much can we take? One miner asked. Not enough, Kevin replied. Take what you can carry. Leave the rest. The alien fleet was getting closer. Long-range sensors showed hundreds of massive ships moving through space, like a dark tide. Each ship was the size of a small city. Their weapons could crack planets in half, but the aliens had made one mistake. They thought humans would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. They thought humans would choose slavery over death. Were wrong. As the 30-day deadline approached, something extraordinary happened. Instead of surrender messages, the aliens began receiving evacuation reports. Millions of humans were leaving their homes, but they weren't running away in panic. They were moving with purpose, like pieces on a chessboard. Jake received new orders from Earth. His ship and dozens of others were to help with evacuations, but they were also to prepare for something else, something the aliens wouldn't expect. Sir, Chris said from his station, I'm getting reports that some colonies are refusing evacuation. They say they'd rather die fighting than live as slaves. Jake looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, alien warships were coming to destroy everything humans had built. But humans had built something the aliens didn't understand. They had built the will to choose their own ending. Send a message to all ships, Jake said. Begin evacuation procedures. And prepare to implement the protocol. The war was about to begin. But it wouldn't be the war the aliens expected. The evacuation ships came like a swarm of metal bees, landing on colony worlds across human space. But they weren't just rescuing people. They were preparing for something much bigger. Engineer Michelle Torres stood in the underground bunker beneath New Denver's capital city. Around her, thick cables ran from massive fusion reactors to hidden chambers deep in the planet's crust. She had spent 10 years of her life building this system. Now she hoped she would never have to use it. The charges are ready, she told Colonel Hayes over the communication link. All outer colonies report full deployment. If we activate the protocol, these worlds will be dead for 10,000 years. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Are you sure it will work? Michelle looked at the control panel in front of her. Red lights showed the status of fusion bombs buried throughout the planet. Each one was powerful enough to level a city. Together, they would turn New Denver into a radioactive wasteland. It will work, she said. The explosions will throw radioactive material into the atmosphere. The air will be poison. The water will be poison. The ground will be poison. Nothing will grow here ever again. On his ship, Jake Morrison was coordinating the biggest evacuation in human history. His communications officer, Chris Johnson, was handling dozens of calls from colony worlds. Green Valley reports 80% evacuation complete, Chris said. Riverside is at 60%. New Pittsburgh is having trouble with the civilian transports. Jake nodded. What about the mining stations? Kevin Walsh says Asteroid Base 7 is nearly empty. They're taking everything they can carry and destroying the rest. A plan was simple in theory, but terrible in practice. Humans would evacuate as many people as possible from the outer colonies. Then, when the alien fleet arrived, they would activate the Scorched Earth Protocol. Every world the aliens wanted to conquer would become a toxic wasteland. Dr. Amanda Scott was working in her laboratory on Titan Prime when the evacuation order came. She was a scientist who studied alien life forms. Her research had helped humans understand dozens of species across the galaxy. "Doctor," her assistant said, "the transport ships are here. We need to pack the most important research." Amanda looked around her lab. 20 years of work surrounded her. Samples from alien worlds, data on dozens of species, experiments that could change humanity's understanding of the universe. "Pack the biological samples first," she said. "Then the computer cores. Everything else stays." As she worked, Amanda thought about what she had learned from studying alien behavior. Most species in the galaxy followed predictable patterns. They conquered worlds to take resources. They enslaved other species to use their labor. They built empires to gain power. But humans were different. Amanda had studied her own species as much as alien ones. Humans would destroy everything they owned before giving it to an enemy. They would die fighting rather than live as slaves. Other species found this behavior crazy and unpredictable. Maybe that would be humanity's advantage. Meanwhile, Admiral Vextalk was reviewing reports from his scout ships. The Zeltharian Empire had conquered over 200 worlds. Their military was the strongest in 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. They had never met a species they couldn't defeat. "The humans are evacuating their outer worlds," his intelligence officer reported. "Large numbers of ships are moving people toward their home system." Vextalk nodded. This was what he expected. Fear made most species reasonable. "Good. They understand they cannot fight us. We will occupy their worlds and put the refugees to work in the mines." But something bothered him about the human evacuation. It was too organized, too complete. Most species left valuable equipment behind when they fled. The humans were taking everything or destroying it. "Admiral," another officer said, "we're detecting unusual energy readings from the human colonies. Large power buildups in uninhabited areas." "Weapons?" Vextalk asked. "Unknown. The energy signatures don't match any known weapon systems." Back on Earth, Lisa Park was making the hardest decision of her life. The Colonial Defense Council had voted. If the aliens attacked any human world, Earth would activate the Scorched Earth Protocol on all outer colonies. "Director," Colonel Haas said, "we need to tell the people what we're planning. Some of them don't know about the protocol." Lisa shook her head. "If we tell everyone, the information might reach the aliens. They need to think we're just running away." It was a terrible choice. Millions of humans were evacuating their homes without knowing those homes would soon be destroyed forever. They thought they might someday return. They were wrong. On Green Valley, Sam Cooper was leading a group of volunteers who had refused evacuation. About 3,000 people had chosen to stay and fight. They knew they would probably die, but they wanted to make the aliens pay a price for taking their world. "We can't stop their big ships," Sam told his militia, "but we can hit their ground forces. Make them work for every building, every street, every farm." The volunteers were farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, and mechanics. They weren't soldiers. But they were angry, and they were fighting for their homes. "What happens if we lose?" someone asked. Sam looked out at the fields where he had grown up. "Then we lose. But at least we lose on our own terms." The alien fleet was 3 days away from the first human colonies when Dr. Scott made a disturbing discovery. She was analyzing data from alien communications when she found something that changed everything. "Jake," she called to Morrison over the ship's communication system, "you need to see this." Jake came to her temporary lab on his ship. Amanda showed him the data on her screen. "I've been studying Zeltharian biology," she said. "Their home worlds are overcrowded. Their population is growing faster than they can build new colonies. That's why they want our worlds. So they need living planets," Jake realized. if we make the planets uninhabitable. They get nothing, Amanda finished. Worse than nothing. They get radioactive dead zones that threaten their other worlds. This changed the whole strategy. The aliens weren't just trying to conquer human space. They needed human worlds to survive. The Scorched Earth Protocol wouldn't just deny them victory. It would threaten their entire empire. Kevin Walsh was on the last transport ship leaving Asteroid Base 7 when he got word from Earth. The protocol was approved. When the aliens arrived, every human world they attacked would be destroyed. How long? He asked the ship's captain. The fusion charges will activate 30 minutes after alien ships enter each system, the captain replied. Just enough time to make sure they're committed to the attack. Kevin looked back at the mining station he had called home for 8 years. Soon it would be a cloud of radioactive debris. But at least the aliens wouldn't get to use it. The transport ships were overloaded with refugees. Families were separated. People had lost everything they owned. Children cried for homes they would never see again. But nobody talked about surrender. Admiral Vexstock received his final intelligence report as his fleet approached the edge of human space. The humans had evacuated most of their civilians, but left defensive forces on many worlds. Some colonies were broadcasting defiant messages, promising to fight to the death. Foolish, Vexstock said to his officers. They could have lived as our servants. Now they will die for nothing. He didn't understand that dying for nothing was better than living for nothing. He didn't understand that humans would choose to destroy everything rather than give it away. The alien fleet moved toward its first target, New Pittsburgh. The industrial world had valuable factories and deep spaceports. It would make an excellent base for further expansion into human territory. In the bunkers beneath New Pittsburgh, the fusion charges waited. Michelle Torres had built them well. When they activated, they would turn the planet's atmosphere into a radioactive storm that would last for centuries. The aliens were about to learn something new about humans. They were about to learn why other species in the galaxy called humans crazy. The lesson would cost them everything. The first alien ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Pittsburgh system. Admiral Vexstock watched from his command ship as hundreds of Zeltharian warships formed attack formations. The human industrial world hung. In space ahead of them, seemingly helpless. Defensive capabilities? Vexstock asked his tactical officer. Minimal, Admiral. 3 orbital defense platforms and perhaps 20 patrol ships. They cannot threaten our fleet. Vexstock smiled. This would be easier than expected. The humans had left behind only a token force. Soon New Pittsburgh would be under Zeltharian control, its factories producing weapons for the Empire. On the surface of New Pittsburgh, Colony Administrator Ben Carter stood in the underground command center. Around him, the last few thousand. Humans who had refused evacuation watched the alien fleet approach on their screens. How long until they reach orbit? Ben asked. 18 minutes, replied his military advisor. The fusion charges are armed and ready. Ben nodded. He was a quiet man who had spent his life managing factories and trade routes. He had never expected to make a decision that would kill a planet. But here he was, holding the activation codes for the Scorched Earth Protocol. Sir, the communications officer said, we're receiving a transmission from the alien fleet. Put it through. Admiral Vexstock's voice filled the command center. Humans of New Pittsburgh, you are defeated. Surrender now, and you will be allowed to work in our service. Resist, and you will be destroyed. Ben picked up the microphone. He thought about his words carefully. They would be the last transmission from New Pittsburgh. This is Administrator Ben Carter, he said. We reject your terms. We reject your authority. We reject your right to take our world. If you want New Pittsburgh, you can have what's left after we're done with it. The transmission ended. Ben looked around the command center at the faces of the people who had chosen to stay. They were scared but determined. 30 minutes after they enter our atmosphere, Ben said, we activate the charges. Everyone needs to be in the deep shelters by then. The alien fleet moved closer. Their massive ships blotted out the stars as they approached the planet. Vexstock was confident this would be a quick victory. The humans had no ships capable of fighting his dreadnoughts. Begin orbital bombardment of military targets, he ordered. Destroy their defenses, but leave the factories intact. Energy beams lanced down from the alien ships, destroying New Pittsburgh's defense platforms in minutes. The few human patrol ships were vaporized before they could fire a shot. Within an hour, the planet's defenses were gone. Send down the landing. Forces, Vexstock commanded. Secure the industrial districts first. Thousands of alien soldiers and dropships began descending toward the planet's surface. They expected to find scattered resistance from desperate humans hiding in the ruins of their cities. Instead, they found empty streets and abandoned buildings. The humans had vanished. In his refugee ship, Jake Morrison watched the battle reports coming in from New Pittsburgh. His communications officer, Chris Johnson, was monitoring all channels. The aliens have landed, Chris reported. No word from Administrator Carter or his people. Jake felt sick. Those were good people on New Pittsburgh. People he had known for years. Soon they would all be dead, along with their world. Any word from the other colonies? Jake asked. Green Valley reports alien ships approaching. Riverside is under attack. The pattern is the same everywhere. Overwhelming force, quick victories. Jake nodded. The aliens were following their standard strategy. Shock and awe, followed by occupation. It had worked on hundreds of worlds. It wouldn't work this time. On New Pittsburgh's surface, Ben Carter was in the deepest shelter beneath the capital city. The alien landing forces had been on the ground for 28 minutes. According to his instruments, they were spreading out across the planet, securing key locations. 2 minutes, Ben announced to the people in the shelter. Above them, Seltharian soldiers were exploring the empty factories and warehouses. They found sophisticated manufacturing equipment, deep space communication arrays, and vast stockpiles of refined materials. New Pittsburgh was even more valuable than their intelligence reports had suggested. 1 minute, Ben said. Admiral Vexstock was pleased with the initial reports. His ground forces had encountered no significant resistance. The human defenders seemed to have simply disappeared. Perhaps they had finally realized the futility of fighting the Zaltharian Empire. Time, Ben said quietly, and pressed the activation button. The fusion charges detonated simultaneously across New Pittsburgh, not just in the cities, but in carefully placed locations throughout the planet's crust. The explosions were designed not just to destroy, but to spread radioactive material as widely as possible. The first sign Admiral Vexstock had that something was wrong was when his sensors detected massive energy releases from the planet's surface. And the shock waves began reaching his ships in orbit. What is happening down there? He demanded. Before his officers could answer, New Pittsburgh's atmosphere began to burn. The fusion explosions had created a chain reaction in the planets. Oxygen-rich air. Radioactive particles were thrown into the upper atmosphere, creating a glowing shell of poison around the world. Lightning storms made of pure radiation crackled between the clouds. Get our forces off the planet, Vexstock shouted. But it was too late. The transport ships trying to lift off from New Pittsburgh's surface were caught in the expanding radiation zone. Their hulls began to corrode. Their electronics failed. One by one, they crashed back to the surface. Within 6 hours, New Pittsburgh had become a ball of radioactive fire. The atmosphere glowed with deadly light. Radiation storms swept across the continents, turning cities into glass and metal into dust. Every Zelfarian soldier on the planet was dead. Every ship in the lower atmosphere was destroyed. Even Vexstock's fleet in high orbit had to retreat to avoid the expanding radiation field. "Status report," Vexstock demanded, his voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "All ground forces lost," his tactical officer reported. "The planet is completely uninhabitable. Radiation levels will remain lethal for thousands of years." Vexstock stared at the burning world on his main screen. In 30 years of conquest, he had never seen anything like this. The humans had destroyed their own planet rather than let it be conquered. "Sir," his communications officer said, "we're receiving reports from the other attack fleets. The same thing is happening at Green Valley, Riverside, and New Denver. The humans are destroying all their worlds." Dr. Amanda Scott was analyzing the data from New Pittsburgh's destruction aboard Jake's flagship. The readings were both terrifying and impressive. The Scorched Earth Protocol had worked exactly as designed. "The radiation field is expanding," she told Jake. "Any ship that gets too close will suffer massive system failures. The planet won't be safe to approach for at least 10,000 years. Jake looked at the tactical display showing New Pittsburgh's location. Where there had once been a thriving human colony, there was now only a radioactive dead zone marked with warning beacons. "How many people were evacuated from New Pittsburgh?" he asked. "About 2 million, Chris replied. "But Administrator Carter and 3,000 volunteers stayed behind to activate the charges." Jake was quiet for a moment. Ben Carter had been a good man. He had died to make sure the aliens got nothing from his world. Reports were coming in from across human space. 12 colonies had activated their scorched earth charges within hours of each other. 12 worlds had become uninhabitable wastelands. The aliens had gained nothing but radioactive graves. Admiral Vexstock was in an emergency conference with the Zelfarian High Command. The holographic images of his superiors flickered in his command chamber, their expressions showing shock and anger. "Explain this disaster," demanded High Admiral Zethkar, the supreme commander of all Zelfarian forces. "The humans destroyed their own worlds," Vexstock replied. "They had prepared some kind of planetary self-destruction system. When we tried to occupy their colonies, they activated it." "Impossible," another commander said. "No species destroys its own worlds. It violates every principle of warfare." "Tell that to the 12 dead planets," Vexstock replied bitterly. "Tell that to the 50,000 soldiers we lost." The High Command was silent for a moment. The Zelfarian Empire had suffered its first major defeat in centuries. Worse, they had gained nothing from it. The human worlds they had tried to conquer were now useless to everyone. "What do you recommend?" High Admiral Zethkar asked. Vexstock looked at the tactical display showing the expanding radiation fields around the destroyed human worlds. Dead zones were like islands of poison in space, threatening any ship that approached. "We need to reconsider our strategy," he said. "The humans are not like other species. They fight differently." But even as he spoke, Vexstock knew it was too late to change course. The Zelfarian Empire had committed its forces to this campaign. They couldn't retreat without looking weak to their other enemies. The war would continue. But now both sides knew the price of victory might be higher than anyone could afford. In the deep shelters of New Pittsburgh, there was only silence. The fusion fires had burned themselves out, but the radiation would linger for millennia. The planet that had once been home to 3 million humans was now a monument to their refusal to surrender. The galaxy would remember what happened here. The Admiral Vexstock made his second mistake 3 weeks after New Pittsburgh burned. He thought the humans would eventually run out of worlds to destroy. Standing in his command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the expanding zones of radioactive death, he studied the tactical situation. 12 human colonies had become uninhabitable wastelands. But humans still controlled over 40 worlds, including their home system. They cannot keep doing this, he told his staff. Officers, eventually they will want to preserve something. We just need to apply more pressure. His intelligence officer, a young Zeltharian named Kexival, disagreed. Admiral, our analysis of human psychology suggests they will destroy everything rather than surrender. Perhaps we should consider negotiation. Vexdoc's eyes blazed with anger. The Zeltharian Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. We will attack 12 more worlds simultaneously. They cannot destroy them all at once. It was exactly the wrong decision. On Earth, Director Lisa Park was in her office when the warning came in. Long-range sensors had detected the alien fleet, splitting into multiple groups, each heading toward a different human colony. 12 targets, Colonel Hayes reported as he entered her office. They're hitting us everywhere at once. Lisa nodded. She had expected this. The aliens thought humans would choose to save some worlds rather than lose them all. They didn't understand that humans would rather rule over ashes than serve as slaves. Send the activation codes to all outer colonies, she ordered. Every world they attack gets burned. All of them? Hayes asked. That's 12 more worlds. 24 total. All of them, Lisa confirmed. We don't negotiate with invaders. The orders went out across human space. Every colony administrator, every planetary governor, every settlement leader received the same message. If alien ships enter your system, activate the Scorched Earth Protocol immediately. Jake Morrison was commanding a refugee fleet of over 10 million people when the new wave of attacks began. His ships were scattered across 3-star systems, trying to find safe harbors for the millions of humans fleeing their homes. Incoming message from Green Valley, Chris Johnson reported from his communication station. Sam Cooper says alien. Ships are approaching. He's requesting final evacuation for non-combatants. Jake looked at the tactical display. Green Valley was a farming world with a population of 800,000. The evacuation ships could maybe save 50,000. More people. The rest would die when the planet burned. Tell him we're on our way, Jake said, knowing it was probably hopeless. Maximum speed to Green Valley. On Green Valley, Sam Cooper was watching the alien fleet approach through his rifle scope. His militia had taken positions in the hills, outside the main settlement. They had improvised weapons, hunting rifles, and mining explosives. Against alien warships, they might as well be throwing rocks. How long until the charges activate? Asked Maria Santos, a teacher who had joined the militia. 30 minutes after they land, Sam replied. Just enough time to make them think they've won. The first alien dropships came down like falling stars. Sam's militia opened fire with everything they had. Their weapons barely scratched the alien ship's armor, but they made noise. They made the aliens think they were facing a real battle. Zeltharian soldiers poured out of the landing craft, expecting to fight desperate farmers. Instead, they found prepared positions and coordinated resistance. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, but they knew the terrain, and they fought with the fury of people defending their homes. For 25 minutes, the battle raged across Green Valley's countryside. The aliens had superior weapons and training, but the humans had something more important. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to make the aliens commit their forces to the planet. 5 minutes, Sam called to his fighters. Everyone to the deep shelters. But many of the militia members didn't move. They kept fighting, buying time for the charges to activate. They knew they were going to die, but they wanted to take as many aliens with them as possible. Dr. Amanda Scott was monitoring the battle from Jake's flagship when Green Valley's fusion charges detonated. The explosion was visible from 2-star systems away. The planet's surface erupted in nuclear fire that burned for hours. Radiation readings? Jake asked grimly. Higher than New Pittsburgh, Amanda replied. They improved the design. This planet will be poisoned for even longer. Similar scenes were playing out across human space. The farming world of Riverside activated its charges while alien soldiers were still exploring the empty cities. The mining colonies of Asteroid Cluster 5 went up in synchronized explosions that created a radiation field spanning 3 solar systems. Each world that died took thousands of alien soldiers with it. More importantly, each world that died created another zone of poisoned space that the aliens couldn't use. Admiral Vextok watched in growing horror as his second wave of attacks turned into another disaster. 12 more human worlds had become radioactive wastelands. 12 more Zeltharian invasion fleets had been destroyed or crippled. Casualties? He asked his staff. Over 100,000 dead, his tactical officer reported. Another 50,000 injured by radiation exposure. Medical facilities are overwhelmed. Vextok stared at the tactical display. Instead of conquering human space, his empire was creating a galaxy-wide zone of death. The radioactive fields around the destroyed. Human worlds were so large, they disrupted major trade routes. Sir, his communications officer said, we're receiving complaints from other species. The Millennium Republic says the radiation from the human worlds is affecting their shipping lanes. The Kepler Coalition is demanding we stop the attacks. 4. The first time in his career, Vextok began to doubt his mission. The Zeltharian Empire needed living worlds to expand their population. But every world they attacked became uninhabitable. They were destroying exactly what they needed most. Jake's refugee fleet had grown to 15 million people. Ships designed to carry hundreds now held thousands. Families were crammed into cargo holds. Children slept in corridors. Food and water were running dangerously low, but nobody talked about surrendering. Admiral, Chris reported, we're receiving a transmission from the Kepler Coalition. They're offering us sanctuary. Jake raised an eyebrow. The Kepler Coalition was a group of smaller, alien species that had managed to stay independent from the major galactic empires. They weren't particularly powerful, but they controlled some useful star systems. What do they want in return? Jake asked. Technology transfer, Chris replied. They want to learn our engineering techniques. Specifically, they want to know how to build worlds that can destroy themselves. Jake almost smiled. The galaxy's minor powers had watched humans turn their own planets into weapons. Now they wanted the same capability to protect themselves from larger empires. Tell them we're interested, Jake said, but we need guarantees of safety for our people. Meanwhile, on one of the surviving human colonies, engineer Michelle Torres was working on improvements to the Scorched Earth Protocol. The first generation of charges had worked well, but she thought they could do better. Wider radiation dispersal, she explained to her team. Longer-lasting contamination. The goal is to make any conquered human world completely useless for 1,000 generations. Her assistant, a young engineer named Bobby Chun, looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, we're talking about making entire star systems uninhabitable. The radiation fields are already affecting neighboring systems. Michelle nodded. That's the point. We want the aliens to understand that attacking us costs more than leaving us alone. It was a brutal calculation, but it was working. Intelligence. Reports showed that the Zeltharian Empire was struggling to maintain support for the war. Their own civilians were beginning to question why they were fighting for dead worlds. More importantly, other species in the galaxy were watching. The peaceful Millennium Republic had begun developing their own planetary self-destruction systems. The trade-focused vegan assembly was quietly building hidden weapons in their commercial centers. Humanity's willingness to destroy everything rather than surrender was changing the balance of power across the galaxy. Smaller species no longer felt helpless against larger empires. They had learned that there were fates worse than death, and weapons more powerful than fleets. Admiral Vextalk received his final orders from the Zeltharian High Command during his 4th week of disasters. They were not the orders he expected. Continue the attacks until the humans surrender. High Admiral Zethkar commanded. The Empire cannot appear weak. Sir, Vextalk replied carefully, we are gaining nothing from these attacks. Every world we conquer becomes unusable. Our casualties are mounting. Other species are beginning to copy human tactics. That is not your concern, Zethkar snapped. You have your orders. The communication ended, and Vextalk stared at the tactical display showing 24 dead human worlds. Each one was marked with radiation warning symbols that would remain there for millennia. He was beginning to understand that the Zeltharian Empire. 6 months after the first human world burned, the Zeltharian Empire was falling apart. Admiral Vextalk stood in his command center, looking at a galaxy map that showed his empire's growing problems. Red zones marked the 36 human worlds that had been turned into radioactive wastelands. Yellow zones showed areas where radiation was affecting trade routes. Orange zones marked systems where other species had started building their own self-destruction devices. Status report, he said to his remaining officers. Half his staff had been reassigned or killed in the fighting. The war is bankrupting us. His economic advisor reported. We're spending more resources blockading dead worlds than we ever gained from conquering living ones. The treasury is nearly empty. What about our other territories? Vextalk asked. 17 species have declared independence in the past month, his intelligence officer said. They're all using human-designed self-destruction systems. When we threaten them, they threaten to blow up their worlds. Vextalk closed his eyes. The Zeltharian strategy of overwhelming force had worked for centuries because other species wanted to preserve their worlds. But humans had changed the rules. Now everyone knew that dying free was better than living as slaves. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison was standing on the observation deck of humanity's new mobile capital. The massive ship had been built from parts salvaged from destroyed colonies and a massive ship, refugee vessels. It wasn't beautiful, but it was home to 5 million humans who had nowhere else to go. Admiral, Chris Johnson said, approaching with a datapad. We've received formal offers of alliance from 43 different species. They all want the same thing. Let me guess, Jake said. They want to learn how to build planetary self-destruction systems. Yes, sir. But they're offering something valuable in return. The Kepler Coalition has 3 habitable worlds they're willing to share. The Millennian Republic is offering advanced medical technology. Even some of the smaller trade guilds want to help. Jake nodded. Humanity had lost their worlds, but they had gained something more valuable, respect. The galaxy's minor powers no longer saw humans as upstart colonists. They saw them as the species that had taught the universe how to say no to tyrants. Doctor Amanda Scott was working in her new laboratory aboard the mobile capital when she made a discovery that changed everything. She had been studying samples of Zeltharian biology, trying to understand their weaknesses. Jake, she called over the communication system, you need to see this immediately. Jake arrived at her lab to find Amanda staring at a genetic analysis. On her computer screen, the Zeltharians are dying, she said without introduction. Their home worlds are so overcrowded that their birth rate is falling. Their population will collapse within 2 generations unless they find new worlds to colonize. Jake understood immediately. They need our worlds to survive, but every world they attack becomes uninhabitable. Exactly, Amanda said. We're not just denying them conquest. We're threatening their entire species with extinction. This explained why the Zeltharian Empire couldn't stop the war, even though it was destroying them. They were fighting for survival, not just expansion. But their strategy was making their situation worse with every attack. On what remained of the Zeltharian home world, High Admiral Zethkar was facing the greatest crisis in his empire's history. Population centers were overflowing. Food production was failing. The military was stretched too thin to maintain control over their remaining territories. The human war must end, his chief advisor said during an emergency council meeting. We cannot afford to lose any more resources. If we stop now, we look weak, Zethkar replied. Every species in the galaxy will think they can defy us. They already think that, another advisor pointed out. Half our former territories have declared independence. The other half are building weapons to destroy themselves if we threaten them. Zethkar stood and walked to the great window overlooking his empire's capital city. Below him, millions of Zeltharians lived in crowded apartment blocks that stretched to the horizon. They needed new worlds. But every attempt to take new worlds had failed. The humans had done something impossible. They had made conquest pointless. Back in human space, engineer Michelle Torres was putting the finishing touches on her greatest work. The new generation of planetary charges was more sophisticated than anything she had built before. These aren't just weapons, she explained to Jake during a briefing. They're designed to create expanding fields of contamination. One activated planet can eventually poison an entire star system. Jake looked at the technical specifications. The new charges would make any star system uninhabitable for 50,000 years. Any empire that tried to conquer human space would inherit a galaxy-wide dead zone. How many worlds have the new systems? He asked. All remaining human colonies. Michelle replied, and we've shared the technology with our new allies. The Kepler Coalition has installed them on all their worlds. So have the Millennian Republic and the Vegan Assembly. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted completely. The major empires no longer dared attack smaller species, because those species could now destroy everything rather than surrender. Wars of conquest had become impossible because the price of victory was always higher than the value of what was conquered. Admiral Vextok was reviewing casualty reports when his communications officer brought him news that ended his career. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human refugee fleet. They want to negotiate. Vextok looked up in surprise. After 6 months of burning their own worlds, the humans wanted to talk? Put them through. Jake Morrison's image appeared on the main screen. He was standing on the bridge of his flagship, looking tired but determined. Admiral Vextok, Jake said, I believe it's time we discussed ending this war. You are in no position to negotiate, Vextok replied. Your species is homeless, your worlds are destroyed, and your empire is bankrupt, Jake responded calmly. Your territories are rebelling. Your population is starving. We may have lost our worlds, but you've lost your empire. It was true, and both men knew it. The Zeltharian Empire was collapsing under the weight of its own victories. What do you propose? Vextok asked. A trade, Jake said. We have something you need, and you have something we need. Explain. You need living worlds for your people. We need a place to rebuild our civilization. The galaxy has plenty of uninhabited systems. We can work together to colonize them instead of fighting over existing ones. Vextok was quiet for a moment. The idea was so simple, it was revolutionary. Instead of conquering worlds from other species, the Zeltharians could work with humans to build new ones. The High Command will never agree, he said finally. Then the High Command will watch their empire die, Jake replied. Because we've taught half the galaxy how to destroy their worlds rather than surrender them. The age of conquest is over, Admiral. You can adapt or you can fall. The transmission ended. leaving Vextok alone with a choice that would determine the fate of his species. 3. Weeks later, High Admiral Zethkar was arrested by his own officers. The Zeltharian military had decided their leaders were leading them to extinction. A new government took power with a single goal: survival. The peace negotiations took place on a neutral station run by the Millennian Republic. Jake Morrison represented humanity. Admiral Vextok, stripped of his rank, but still the Empire's best negotiator, represented what remained of the Zeltharian government. "We propose joint colonization efforts," Jake said during the first meeting. "Humans provide the engineering, expertise to build self-sustaining colonies. Zeltharians provide the transportation and heavy construction capability. Both species benefit. And if we refuse?" Vextok asked. "Then you continue fighting a war you cannot win against an enemy that cannot lose," Jake replied. "Eventually, your empire collapses and your species becomes extinct. We'll survive as refugees, but you won't survive at all." The negotiations lasted for months, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Zeltharian Empire needed what humanity offered: a way to expand without conquest, a way to survive without making enemies. The final treaty was signed 1 year after New Pittsburgh burned. The Zeltharian Empire would help human refugees establish new colonies and uninhabited systems. In return, humans would share their advanced engineering and their most terrible secret: how to make any world too costly to conquer. Jake Morrison stood once again on the observation deck of humanity's mobile capital, but now he was watching construction ships building the first of the new joint colonies. Human engineers and Zeltharian workers were cooperating to create something that had never existed before, a world designed to be unconquerable. "How does it feel?" Dr. Amanda Scott asked, joining him at the window. "Strange," Jake admitted. 6 months ago, they were trying to destroy us. Now we're building worlds together. "The galaxy learned an important lesson," Amanda said. "Some things are more valuable than survival. Freedom is one of them. And once you're willing to die for freedom, no one can take it away from you." Outside the window, the new world was taking shape. It would be humanity's first permanent home since Earth, but it would also be different from any world humans had ever built. It would be designed not just to support life, but to destroy itself if anyone tried to.